IVM.
I didn't want to start something of my own, quite frankly. I was very content in what I was doing. I loved it. And I had no desire to leave that. And it wasn't on my mind that I have to find a startup idea. I was very happy with what I was doing, and I had my life chalked out in terms of how I want to progress in my career, right? That was important for me because I'm ambitious and career oriented. But I was never thinking of, okay, let me figure out what I want to start, and I want to start on my own. When I started traveling when I went to Europe with friends in 2011, that's when I got introduced to hostels. And that thought didn't leave my mind, that I want to do this. It's because the idea sort of became so important for me that everything else I arranged in my life around it.
Hello and welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast. I travel a lot for work. I'm practically on the road for more than 150 days in a typical year. And I stay in hotels which are suited for business travel, like the ones with comfortable rooms, great in-room dining, a good gym or a pool, and a sumptuous breakfast. It was only about 6 years back or so when I traveled to South America that I stayed in a hostel for the first time ever and got to experience that culture. It is in many ways the exact opposite of what business travel is. Hostels are more about what is outside the room than what is inside. It is more about who you meet and hang with, and not really about Netflixing and chilling in your room. And it is certainly not about in-room dining. My guest today is someone who was a researcher by training and who was inspired to open her own chain of hostels after she fell in love with the hostel culture while traveling in Austria many years back. Pallavi Agrawal is the founder of goSTOPS, one of India's first and most successful hostel chains. I spoke to her about her amazing entrepreneurial journey. I asked her to decode the hostel culture, which for me in many ways is representative of the Gen Z culture itself. I spoke to her about her organization and how they tackled the pandemic in an extremely unique and humane way, and also about how they've grown 6 times over in revenue since then. The kind of a profit story that is so rare in the unicorn culture that we live in today, isn't it? Stay with us. We'll be right back on the Filter Koffee Podcast.
Hello, everybody. It's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam talks to Dr. S. Prakash. He's the Managing Director of Star Health. They discuss the different types of health insurance. We have a new show, Cyberpoint by Checkpoint. Shiladitya Mukhopadhyay talks to Prakash Bell. He's the Head of Security Engineering at Checkpoint Software Technologies. They discuss phishing, what it is, and how one can stay safe from it. On Probation se Promotion Tak, Abhinav Trivedi discusses some basic personality hacks to convert your work insecurity into your strength. On Storytellers and Story Sellers, Saloni Gaur and Neil discuss the world of influencer marketing. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus is joined by Samir Nair. He's the CEO of Applause Entertainment. They discuss Samir's body of work in the Indian television and OTT space. And on Marathi Khidkitun, the Deshmukhs decode M.M. Deshpande's poem, Karat Nahi. Once again, I'd like to remind you all, please do check out our merch. It's available on IVM Podcast website. Go click the shop tab and you'll be able to see our first collections of t-shirts. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Remember, we got a bunch of YouTube channels as well. And if you want to check that out, go to our website, ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. We have a list of all those channels. And remember, do tell a friend if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter. Word of mouth is one of the most important and best ways for us to get the word out about this podcast. Also, it's a way for you to have discussions about a podcast with your friends. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Boat Lifestyle, Checkpoint Software, Small Case, and Intel vPro. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast, Pallavi. How are you doing and where are you talking to us from?
Hi, Karthik. Thank you for having me here. I am talking to you from Delhi, and I'm doing good.
Did you grow up in Delhi? Have you always been a Delhi person?
No. So I grew up in Haridwar for the early part of my life. For about 13 years, I was in Haridwar. So in 95, we moved to Delhi because my father changed his job and came to Delhi. But yeah, formative years were in Haridwar.
How was it like growing up in Haridwar? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think It was really nice because of the fact that my father was in the BHL colony. So it's like a factory colony. So it's a very different feeling to live in something like that. It was essentially called Ranipur. And there were people in my father's batch who were his age. So their kids were our age. So it was like a nice idyllic colony life growing up, heading out every evening for little picnics. We were literally chucked out of the house to go out so that when the fathers came back, all they had was peace and quiet and not howling kids around. So all the kids were usually out in the evening and riding their bicycles, going to the club, all of those things. So lovely growing up there. Lots of greenery, very good access to the Himalayas, a lot of travel that we did in those early days with my family and my friends. So it was quite cool.
This is unintended, even 2 minutes back, but it tell me something I always wanted to ask people who grew up in Banaras or Haridwar and all of that. You said, cycle down to the club.
Yeah.
Like that's something that I wouldn't associate with the city like Haridwar. And of course, I'm being very stereotypical, right? But how much of the temple, the spirituality, the religious tourism is part of your daily life, or is that just what tourists care about, and there is a different Haridwar there?
No, so we were slightly away from Haridwar. It's an area called Ranipur.
Right.
So it was the BHL factory which was built next to the Rajaji National Park. So when the colony was built, we had our own club, our own amphitheater, and Olympic-sized swimming pool, a skating rink. So we were very close to Haridwar, 2 kilometers away. But the spirituality and the religious practices did not impact Ranipur at all. So
wow.
Pretty removed from it. But the Ganga was right there. So like we could go to it whenever we felt like, but it wasn't a part of our daily lives, no.
Beautiful. I'm putting 2 and 2 together and going way, way ahead of the story here. But travel and destinations and the hills and all, I'm assuming were a very, very early part of growing up. So I think you look at it from a different perspective than people from the outside. Talking of travel, how was childhood like? Did you guys travel and staying somewhere else a big part of life growing up?
Absolutely. I think I owe my travel bug to my parents. So very early on only we started traveling quite a bit, only because of the fact that the hills were so close to us.
Right.
And my father is a mountaineer. So as a result,
oh, wow.
It was just something that we did, like every weekend he would itch to plan something, even if it's a day trip to go to. We had access to Dehradun, which was right there. Rishikesh was 2 hours away, so everything was so close by that if they'll get an itch, they'll just call their friends up within the colony and say, let's just pack our bags and leave for the day for a picnic. So we'll just find a river or a tributary and cook our meal there and come back home in the evening. So those kind of things were a regular feature in our lives. Besides that, because they were part of the mountaineering club in BHL, so they had all this gear and they used to take nobody believes me, but the third DPS was in Haridwar, in Ranipur. So we were studying there.
This is the Delhi Public School for the uninitiated.
Delhi Public School, yes, which is now like a lot of them, but the third one was legitimately in Ranipur. They would take the school kids also for treks and small mountaineering trips. So we also got to do that quite a bit. So like I remember as early as when I was 10, we were going for the Devariya Tal, Tungnath, Chandrashila trek with our own backpacks, which is now a trek. But at that time, they didn't even have lights on the road. I'm talking about 1992, 94. So yeah, traveling was a big part of my life growing up.
Massive, yeah. But what was the dream growing up at that point? And when did you move out of the city, out of the town?
I don't know. Dream growing up, if you are living in a colony which is filled with engineers, they always expect you to do only 2 things, which is either become a doctor or an engineer. So right. I think everybody was doing that around us. But given the fact that it was a largely, very focused, people were studying, everybody wanted to get into an IIT or an IIM, that kind of a thing from the very beginning. I think the good thing was that we were we have to build our own careers. That was clear to everybody within that colony, be it a girl or a boy. But fortunately for me, my parents never had any expectations that you should do engineering or whatever you should do. You should get into the medical line. They were like, you should do whatever you want as long as you're good at it. So, which is what my focus was. I didn't want to become an engineer. I didn't want to do medical, but I wanted to do something interesting that would fascinate me. So MBA was the obvious choice because I wasn't clear on what I wanted to do. And I started with qualitative research, in fact, after finishing my MBA. growing up, I just knew that I wanted to travel a lot somehow. I didn't know how it'll happen. I just, at that time, you don't know how you're going to make it happen. And I'm talking about growing up means when I was at 93, 94, I didn't know how you can make a living out of travel, right? But I knew I wanted to travel. But at that time, there was no internet per se, wherein you could even think of doing these things. The only thing that I used to watch and I used to find very fascinating was a show online, which show on Doordarshan, which was called Surabhi, cultural magazine and a window to India to us, right? It used to fascinate me. Maybe I can do a show like that someday, and get to travel because of it. But I didn't know how I would sort of end up doing it.
As a fellow 90s kid, I can tell you that I think most of the things we wanted to do, we didn't know how to make a living out of it, right? Like, there was very few roadmaps that way from a career perspective, isn't it? Like, you want to be a filmmaker, you don't know how to make a living out of it, but you just want to do it. You want to become a chef, no way you know how to do this as a career. But the more I go down, in this show and I speak to entrepreneurs like you, it's very evident that, at least to me, it seems like for someone growing up in a smaller town, the intent to be an entrepreneur, the intent to start up of something on your own seems to be much higher. Right? When we talk of the startup community, we always talk about, think of the Valley and Bangalore, etc. But I think this intent seems to be much, much higher in people who grew up in smaller towns. Would you sort of agree?
I don't think so. I have not felt that way because I didn't want to start something of my own, quite frankly. I was very content in what I was doing. I loved it. And I had no desire to leave that. And it wasn't on my mind that I have to find a startup idea.
Right.
I was very happy with what I was doing and I had my life chalked out in terms of how I want to progress in my career, right? That was important for me because I'm ambitious and career oriented. But I was never thinking of, okay, let me figure out what I want to start and I want to start on my own. When I started traveling when I went to Europe with friends in 2011, that's when I got introduced to hostels. And that thought didn't leave my mind that I want to do this. It's because the idea sort of became so important for me that everything else I arranged in my life around it.
Right.
So it was never my intent to start a startup.
Right. And I was reading this Inc. 42 article on you, and it talks about this particular incident you're talking about. And I'm assuming this is in Austria somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. But before you go into that thought of hostels, what were you doing at that point? What was career up until then?
So I started my career with doing business research, which is secondary business research with a KPA called the Smart Cube. Then I did my MBA and joined Tata Capital. There I was doing rural financial research. So I've been a researcher through and through. Then I joined Quantum and after that, Millward Brown, which is now Kantar.
Right.
And I was doing qualitative research with them. So about 8 to 9 years of research experience before I started my startup.
I spent a majority of my early career in Frost & Sullivan. So in that sense, I think we come from very, very similar backgrounds. It also helps you sort of get a grounding on understanding different industries fairly well, isn't it? So now you're in Austria and then you're experiencing the hostel experience for the first time. Tell us what was that experience and what were you thinking then that you should be doing after that?
So this was a friend whose girlfriend is Polish and was a student. So he would make a biannual trip to Europe to meet her. And they were always on a budget with about 20, 30 days under their belt to spend with each other biannually. So this time he said that, why don't you guys come along? So my husband was like, may as well, what have we got to lose? He said, the only thing is I'll do all the bookings and I'll book the stay, I'll book the transport. And you just have to come along. As we were like, okay, fine. We didn't know he was going to put us up in hostels. So we were covering, we were going to Hungary, Italy, Austria, Slovenia. So these were the 4 countries that we were covering. And the first hostel we landed at, it was a smallish hostel, but we still could see some of the travelers there. And I was like, this is so cool. We have to do our own thing. There was no cafe or room service. You could get your food. You had your own kitchenette. You could cook your food and share your meals with other people, something that I'd never done back in India, staying at a hotel. So it was really nice. We made a couple of friends. Then when we reached Austria, that was the largest hostel that I was staying at. And I think they were about 150 or 200 beds. So it was a very large place. And we met people in the common areas, went out with them during the day for some guided tours and such. And then in the evening, when we came back, we realized there was music coming from some area which we hadn't discovered in the morning. And we went there and we realized there were volunteers who were fixing drinks for €1. €1 is so cheap for drinks. And these were all like volunteers at the hostel. So we all, like everybody from the hostel was there in that room, drinking, dancing, talking. It was such a cool event, and we spent the entire night talking to people there. And I realized this is something that young people in India also deserve, as in we should have places like this, which have common areas like this, which people can interact with each other and sort of make friends and have a fun time, not just exploring the city, but even staying in that city.
Right.
So with that thought, I think that thought just sort of stayed with me. I came back, I tried to make a lot of business cases, trying to figure out, will this make money? Will this not make money? Will Indians warm up to it? And it took me about a year, 2 years to actually leave my job to take that step. And I kept looking for properties in the middle because I was not in real estate. I didn't understand real estate. Finally, in 2013, I found a property and in Varanasi. I was a bit scared. My mom said, if you don't do it now, when will you do it? You may as well do it. You've been mulling over it for the last 2 years. And that's how I started. She was one of my first financiers. And
Wow.
yeah.
I want to pick up this thread on your first property and why in Banaras and all of that. But before we go into, your startup journey, just talking about the hostel culture, right? I got introduced to it when I traveled to South America in the mid 2010s. What I realized is that at least in the last 10 years, I travel a lot for work, right? And when you travel, you stay in the Marriotts and the Hiltons and the Hyatts of the world. And, the culture is, when you come back from a long day's work, you go through that really boring corridor with multiple rooms on both sides. All you're thinking of is I just want to go in, shut the door, and then be in this little space by myself, right? And typically, if you're not in work travel, you typically, a family is going on a vacation. And let's assume it's an upwardly mobile family, then you're still thinking the same thing. I'm going to get a pool in my room. I'm going to close the door, etc. Right? But my understanding of hostel culture, and I'd love to hear yours. It's the opposite of this, isn't it? It's like I'm not going there just to stay by myself. I'm actually going there for some extraordinary serendipity, so that I can meet this person who's volunteering in this $1 drink room. I can learn new things. I can understand new cultures, meet new people. And hey, by the way, I can always go back to the room if I find it boring, sort of a thing, right? But how do you decode the hostel culture
In India?
Is it different in India?
I think that it's largely similar, because I think the youth globally, because they're consuming the same content now thanks to OTTs or similar content, they've become largely quite aligned with each other as far as aspirations is concerned. And as far as life stage and how you want to reach different milestones in your life are concerned, youth are globally becoming aligned increasingly on that. But I think there's still differences between travel trends as far as India and global youth is concerned. Because I think one basic difference is that in India, we are a very milestone-driven society even right now. So we want to finish college, we want to do a postgrad, we want to get a job, then we want to get a car, then we want to possibly get married, have children. That's still the largely accepted belief system in the country, right? So as a result, you do not take out a year or 2 years traveling. You will take out travel time in between your work life and in between your work and your personal life. So you'll take out the travel time then, which is usually shorter travel periods than 3 days, 4 days, 5 days instead of 6 months, which is very common in Europe. So I think that's one big difference, that backpacking per se for long periods of time is still something that is not popular in India. And the second thing is we are learning as Indians, learning to travel solo. We're largely people who will travel with our friends, even if it is 1 or 2 friends, but we tend to travel with somebody rather than traveling alone. Traveling solo is still a very niche concept in the country. So, and that is something which is very common in Europe. So these are some of the broad differentiators between the traveling habits. But coming back to how hostels fit into this framework, I think travel is very aspirational today, thanks to all the content which is being put out there, everything that Surbhi was the only thing that was covering back in the day when Doordarshan was there. And now there's so many travel and lifestyle talk shows and content pieces out there, which is inspiring people to hit the road more. I think hostels allow people to travel without burning a hole in their pocket. So given the fact that youth is very accepting of a shared economy concept, be it co-living or co-working, hostels fit right in because it's not a compromise that you're in a dormitory. It's in fact fun because you get to interact with people more closely than you would have done had you been in a box, in a room, alone on your own. So it's in fact a trade up instead of a trade down. And it allows you to save money, which means that the frequency of travel can increase. You can explore more places because in one trip, you're not really spending all the money that you have saved up for travel. The second thing is, I think people are getting, financially independent in the country now slightly earlier. And financial responsibilities are kicking in slightly later. So as a result, the me time that is available to young people is going up when they are not dependent on their parents for the money. And neither do they have responsibilities to be prudent about what they're doing with their money. So, as a result, people are willing to do a lot more things with their free time, be it pursuing a hobby, being it traveling or anything else that they want to do. So they're doing all of those things. And as a result, they're taking out a lot more money for travel as well. So I've seen that they will just hit the road on a weekend, like let's just take a Volvo to Manali, go to a hostel in Manali for a couple of nights. And because it's so impromptu, this plan, they are not always able to figure out friends that they can travel with. So hostels become a good choice because you will go there, you will find like-minded individuals who've been in the same conundrum and have landed there without friends and are open to interacting with perfect strangers and become friends. So I think then hostels really just fit right into it. And, you can just take a Volvo, not worry who's coming with you because wherever you'll go. If you're staying in a hostel, then you'll find people who are probably looking for a companion for the trip as well. So I think that's the good part about traveling and staying in hostels for Indians.
Yeah, so if you were to take the typical Indian millennial traveler, or is it the Gen Z traveler?
Yeah, we focus on the Gen Z.
On the Gen Z, okay.
Yeah.
If you take the Gen Z traveler today, right? What are the 3 or 4 things that he or she looks for in a hostel?
I think the top of the thing is a common area. The common area is the heart and soul of any hostel. And it has to be a great place which, just by the design, lends itself to community and socializing. So just to give you an example, different people design their common areas differently. But for us, for example, we'll always have one long table in the common area. Because it's one long table, then you're not separate units, right? So you're forced to interact with each other. The moment you sit across each other on one table, you at least will drop a hi, right? If you're not going to ask you, how long are you in Manali for? How long are you in Kasol for? How did you travel? If you don't get into the details of that, you'll at least drop a hi, right? So a good common area is essential for any hostel. Now, most of the common areas in the hostel industry, globally and in India as well, come with gaming areas. So there'll be a pool table, a foosball table, a recreation zone. There may be a projector with a home theater system so that people can sit together and watch content together. So, and obviously like a large table where people can interact and some board games and things like that. So these are usual suspects that you'll find in all hostels. So that's the soul of the place. The second thing that they're obviously looking for is a great and clean dorm room or a private room so that they can have a great sleep when they turn in for the day, right? So just has to be a nice mattress, a clean duvet, a nicely working air conditioner, because that's all you need, that only at the night. So this is something that is essential. And the third is obviously the fact that it should be a 24 setup and you can see people around through the day, through the night, because I think young people are largely nocturnal. So it can't be a dead place in the middle of the night. So that's how most hostels are. They're 24/7 setups. That's what they're looking for. And some activities to go along with it so that, there's some ice-breaking sessions or there is a walking tour or a sunset walk or a sunrise walk so that they can experience the city with the help of the hostel. So I think these are the top 3 things that they're looking for.
What about locations, right? Where do they want it? Because I'm just reflecting as you're talking about. And again, these are the things that go against the grain of, mainstream accommodation, right? I'm not talking about the Airbnb, but the mainstream hotels, right? Like it's the room as something that you just go to sleep, right? It's a
Right.
different concept. The lobby as something coming together is a different concept, right? But when it comes to a location, right? Whenever I've traveled to South America more than Europe, or even when I see hostels in Bombay, I've seen them more in the downtown or the where the action is sort of a thing, and not necessarily in a remote part of Manali or something like that, which is where a typical Airbnb would be. Right? Is there any difference at all in terms of the location of a hostel?
Yeah, see, depends. There are city hostels and there are hostels that are there in slightly remote locations as well. But when it comes to a city hostel, for example, it has to be well connected. So if you're in a Bangalore, it doesn't have to be in Indiranagar per se.
Hmm.
But if Indiranagar and Koramangala are important for the young people to travel to, it should have seamless access to it, which is budget friendly. It can't be that they're expected to take a cab from wherever they are and spend 2 hours on the road, right? So
Right.
you need to figure out a spot like that which connects you to most of the important locations in the city. It has to be a place which has like grocery stores and things like that around so that they can take care of their basic requirements. And these are the two main things when you look for locations for city hostels, which is transport, which is connectivity, and access to like food and grocery stores and pan ki dukan and all of those things, right? Like the normal cigarette shops and things like that. When it comes to leisure destinations, again, if they have some key points to look at within a city, within that leisure destination, then you should have access to it. But in a leisure destination, you have a slightly more flexibility in terms of you could choose a place which is more in the midst of nature rather than in the midst of where all the hotels are, because those places are usually not that attractive looking, because a
Hmm.
bunch of buildings all put together, even if you look at a Masuri. So if you move a little outside, then you can get, great views, a great location, but still connected to the main center. So I think that it's a balance when it comes to leisure locations. It's a balance of views and location and connectivity. Because I think at the end of the day, you want to be in a place where you can take in the views.
Right. At this point, I want to go back, Pallavi, to your journey. So now you come back from Austria, and then you spend a couple of years figuring out what the next step is, and then you engage with this property in Benares. Why Benares?
So I think it was very clear to me early on only that Indians are not aware of the concept of hostels, right?
Hmm.
So I couldn't have built while I was doing this only because I wanted young Indians to travel, right? And it was almost like something that young Pallavi didn't have when she was like independently traveling on her own without her family, that I had a place which was like the places that I saw in Austria. I didn't have that growing up. So the reason to start this was only so that young Indians can travel. But I knew that in 2014 or 13, I wouldn't get enough people to stay at my hostel because Indians weren't aware of the concept of hostels back then. So the obvious choice was to pick up something on the backpacking trail for India, for the European and the Australian and the Israeli travelers, right? So there is a backpacking trail in the country, which is some 20, 25 odd locations where these people usually go to. So to pick up a location on that trail itself. Varanasi is the quintessential Indian experience. Everybody does it if they're in the north of India. It's like everybody does a Munnar or an Alleppey if they're in the south of India, right? So it was a quintessential Indian experience that I thought that would be the safest bet to start with. And something which is not as short as Agra. Agra has become a one-day trip, right? You go to Agra, you do the Taj Mahal and you move to Jaipur. But Varanasi is like a 3-4 day trip easily, right? There is
Right.
morning Ganga Aarti, then there's the evening Ganga Aarti, then there are the music schools, and then there is the sari ki shops, and then there are the toy makers, the old lanes, the food. There's so much story behind everything that when a foreign backpacker comes to Varanasi, they feel like and then there's Sarnath, they feel like they have to stay for 4-5 days. So I think at least I will have people stay with me for a longer period of time in Varanasi. And Varanasi was 10 times cheaper than Delhi in terms of real estate. So as a risk, I didn't want to start with Delhi because Delhi would have been really expensive.
Yeah.
And Banaras would have been more affordable for me to start my first hostel. So which is why I chose Varanasi, and Varanasi was super well connected to Delhi. And there was a flight, there were several overnight trains between Delhi and Varanasi. So I was like, at least I can come back home easily while setting up the hostel. So that's why Varanasi it was. And
but purely as an entrepreneur, right? Becoming an entrepreneur in the hospitality business is one of the things that I can think of is the furthest from being a career researcher, right? Where everything you need to do what you're doing exists on your table. And then the opposite of that is your journey where nothing is on your table. You have to go out and look for everything, right? Talk to us about some of the most, at the time, and you're also someone, like you said earlier, who did not always aspire to be an entrepreneur. What are those really, really testing moments in this journey where, I don't know if you really came to it, but you really thought, is this worth it sort of moments?
I think the most testing moments are obviously when you're trying to figure out the product market fit, right? Especially when you're creating a category which has not existed before. So you're not sure how people are going to like it. Because it's okay to do it for the foreign backpacker, but the number of foreign backpackers that we receive within the age group that stays in hostels is about, before COVID, was about less than 12 million. So right now, it's not there at all, but it was really small as a number. So do you start building a business for that? Obviously not. But then how do you, when you're bootstrapped, you don't have the marketing budgets.
Weren't you also one of those earliest hostel chains in India?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely
Please
right.
Continue.
Yeah. So, and you're bootstrapped, so you don't know how to spend money on marketing because it's the last thing you have money left for when you are bootstrapped. So, because you are also have to run your hostels and you have to manage the P&L, so you have expenses there and you're bootstrapped. You're like, okay, let's not spend on marketing. So, it is challenging to find a product market fit in the first go. The second big challenge comes in terms of how do you market the product, how you talk about it, where do you get the money from? The largest challenge is how do you raise money for something which has not existed before, right? So these are some of the moments which will test you as an entrepreneur and test your zeal to go forward. Can you put in the effort to go through with having no money coming, or no institutional money coming in, and still growing your business? And how do you do it? Because then you have to make it operationally positive so that you're not burning through your own savings. And it's very difficult for a startup to become operationally positive in the early years. So I think those are some of the challenges, and it is very testing. But I think I was married to the idea of seeing this ecosystem grow. I'm still married to it. If somebody asks me, can you do something else right now? There's literally nothing that comes to my mind except for hydroponics. Like, I really like the idea of that. But besides that, there's nothing comes to my mind that I want to do besides running a hostel. And that's all I want to do. I want to see this ecosystem grow. It should be something that should be the default choice of young people to travel, so that they can travel a lot more. They can hit the road every weekend if they wish to, without spending too much money, so that they can explore a lot more around themselves. I think that is what just kept me going, and it keeps me going even today.
It's a great place to be, isn't it?
Yeah,
it
is.
Like this is, given anything else, this is the only thing I would rather do. Right? goSTOPS has been phenomenally successful, and I'll just come to that in just a bit. But what are the things that you feel you got right when it comes to understanding, this culture?
I think some of the things that we got right in the beginning was understanding travel aspirations for young people. What are they looking for? How are the travel trends emerging? I think some of my consumer behavior qualitative research background helped me there. And also the fact that I myself was a traveler sort of made it easy for me to read what the consumer was looking for. So the fact that people are itching to head out more was something that I understood it, but at the same time, I understood how to change the model for Indians very quickly. Like, for example, globally, it's not a thing that you have to have, curtains on your dorm bed. But we know that young Indians like the concept of privacy, even in a shared space. So we introduced curtains early on. Small tweaks like that, like just in the design, sort of make it easier for you to make the product more appealing to everybody. Globally, I had picked up from wherever I'd stayed earlier, I'd picked up that you tend to do your own dishes after having a meal. But I knew that Indians weren't going to do it. We never do it at our homes, and it's always our parents who pick up after us. So I was like, it's not going to happen. So then we tweaked that. We initially had a pantry in all our hostels because foreign travelers, because they're traveling for a long period of time, tend to cook their own meal. Indians, because they were traveling for short spurts, like 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, they had no intention of cooking their own meals. So I was like, I'm just wasting real estate by giving a pantry. For the 5-6% Indians who would cook their meals, I think there was no point in keeping a pantry going. So some of these things we picked up early on in terms of what they're looking for in terms of design of the space. That helped us. I think the second thing is our common areas were absolutely in line with what young travelers were looking for. And we keep picking that feedback up. What is working? What is not working? Because the common area is the soul of the place. As in, till today, my team and I, we leave properties that don't have enough common spaces. Because if you do not put the right common space, you cannot make that dormitory aspirational. You have to have the right common areas to make that dormitory aspirational, so that it is a really big trade-up. That for 700 rupees, I got all this, and I can't believe it. Then they forget that they're actually in an 8-bed dorm with 7 other people snoring in the same room.
It's amazing. And these seem to really work for you, isn't it? I think one of the things I love about goSTOPS is, especially in the investment climate and the valuation climate we are in, you're a very, very revenue strong organization, and you've been growing. What is it, 4x, 5x now compared to the lockdown?
Yes.
Phenomenal, isn't it? What are some of the things that led to this exponential growth? Where did you invest time and money and effort in?
I think during the lockdown, real estate became more available because of the fact that hospitality was completely dead. We go after what is called the long tail hotel supply, which is essentially less than 50 room properties which are unorganized. So, which was essentially what Oyo, Tribo, and Fab were also going after. But they were going after the aggregator route, which is the owner themselves run it. We are, in fact, currently the only operator in this space. So we take these properties over and run it for the owner. So these owners are typically people who have excelled in their businesses, be it cement, thread, bag making, whatever it is, right? And they've created a hotel of their own. They're not hospitality people. They've done well in their trade. As a symbol of that success, they've created this large hotel. But they may not have the interest or the inclination to run it. Right. So they need operators, right? So which is where we step in. So during the lockdown, I think because these owners, most of the people who had taken the properties on rent left because there was no way to pay rent, there were no people coming, there were travel restrictions. So properties became available. And at that time, we jumped into action and said, let's just pick up more and more hotels. And it worked for the owners and it worked for us, both. So these owners essentially, so it worked for them. And it worked for us that they got somebody who's willing to run the properties. And we got into long-term lease agreements or revenue share agreements with them at that point in time for 10 years, 15 years. So I think that is something that we did during the lockdown, which helped us grow because we went out and we started building more hostels very aggressively.
Then something, when you say that you will go in and run the place yourselves, it also means that you sort of make it look like goSTOPS, right? Like, so does it mean that you'll also make structural changes to the property?
No, it's largely interior design changes, which is fixtures and fittings and upholstery and things like that. We do not change the civil structure in any way. So we will obviously identify the existing restaurant or a conference room as one of the common areas. And the bigger rooms will be converted into dormitories. The smaller rooms will be staying as private rooms. We'll change the upholstery. We'll refurbish the common areas and add everything that is needed to make it a great common area, including furniture and electronics. All of those things will be added by us. So that's what we do. But we don't structurally change anything in the property.
That means a fair bit of your design languages sort of permeates the place.
Absolutely.
Yes. And what is your design language? What kind of design language works in the hostel culture? Is it a more minimalist sort of a thing? Different
hostels have different design languages. Like even right now that there are 4-5 players and all of us are quite distinct from each other. But for us, it's simple. We're catering to the GenZ or millennials or young people in any age cohort when we were young are all very colorful, lively people. So we have a colorful interior to mirror that reality of their personality. And I think that sort of gels with the young people because they walk into a goSTOPS and each goSTOPS has the same 6 colors. So in everything that we do inside, so it just sort of clicks, this is the goSTOPS, right? And there's a sense of familiarity. Our repeat ratio is about 40%. So we have people who've been staying with us in multiple locations or in the same location over and over again. So I think
wow.
Yeah.
That's an astonishing statistic. Sorry to interrupt your flow, but 4 out of 10 people who come are repeat. That's a very clear mark in that direction, right? That's
Yes,
amazing. Yeah.
it is. And so there's this colorful interior which they associate with goSTOPS. And I think that is our design lab. Besides the fact that we want every area to be usable for multiple reasons. So if it's a lounge area, then one thing that we're very particular about is we have to have plug points there so that anybody can open their laptop, watch a movie, work, sleep while working, get up and watch a movie again, whatever. So it should be just like how young people are. They don't plan that way. So
God bless your soul. I mean, the amount I think I've invested about 20% of my life looking for plug points in hotel lobbies. And I'm probably being conservative when I say that. It is extraordinary. Yeah. And I love that you're picking up on these and sort of catering to that. In your business, there's also these two different models, right? One, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not an expert. There's a FOCO and the COCO model, isn't it? One is franchisee owned and the other is the company owned.
Yeah.
How do they differ and what works for you better?
So the difference is only in terms of the investment to convert the hotel into a hostel. So in a FOCO, which is a franchisee-owned company operated, the landlord or the hotel owner makes the investment to convert a hotel into a hostel. But in a company-owned company operated, we put in that investment to convert the hotel into a hostel. But in both cases, we operate.
In your case, would you be over-indexed towards any one model?
At the present moment, it's COCO. Or I think it's, just because the new properties are all mostly company-owned, company-operated, and they're larger units.
Right.
So more beds in company-owned, company-operated at the present moment. But going forward, I think as the number of hostels go up and the ecosystem for hostels in the country becomes stronger, I think doing FOCO will become easier, which is the landlord themselves put in the money to convert rooms into dormitories and creating those common spaces.
The pandemic must have been really troubling for you, isn't it? It must have really challenged some of your beliefs.
Absolutely. It was troubling for everybody. It was challenging and it was a time to regroup and reset, right? And I think a lot of businesses did that. So when the pandemic hit us, we knew it was coming because we were catering to the foreign travelers, right? So it started showing early signs in February itself. And we started getting COVID ready. And the travel restrictions started getting imposed globally in terms of which nationalities can enter India, cannot enter India, had already started happening in Feb of 2020. So we knew it was only a matter of time that the lockdowns in India were going to be announced, because globally the lockdowns had started getting announced in February. So I remember we had sort of foreseen that we'll have to close our hostels down in March. And we were prepared to shut the hostels down on 19th of March. Like that was the time that we had decided we'll shut it down. And coincidentally, they announced the lockdown roughly around the same time. So we knew that this was going to be, I don't know how long it was going to be, but given what was happening globally, it seemed like it could be anywhere between 2 months to 6 months to a year or whatever it was. So we sort of closed our hostels down. We were already in that mode to close the hostels down and maintain the buildings, because if you close the hostels down and like lock it up, then everything inside the hostels would just get ruined. And all the investment that was made by us or the franchisee partners would go for a toss. So we started recalibrating how are we going to take care of the staff, because that was one of my most important commitments, that I want to take care of my ground team, which is the people who are actually running the hostels, and take care of the assets and the buildings. So that's what we did. Our staff moved into our hostels. They kept maintaining the hostels even though we were not hosting anybody. And we kept paying salaries for the 6 months of the first lockdown. And I think our landlord stepped up because they knew that there was no business. So they gave us a rent waiver. All our landlords gave us a rent waiver. In the bargain, obviously, we had to take care of the property really well, and which we were doing. And this allowed us to move the funds towards the ground team and pay their salaries. So that's how we sort of coped with the pandemic, the first wave. And then we regrouped and said, let's work on our SOPs, let's work on our tech, let's work on the other things that get neglected during business as usual. So we were all working from home, and we were all on Zoom calls every day as if, it's office. And it was good fun.
You make it sound quite simple, but some of the things you mentioned are really, really hard decisions, isn't it? But I love the idea of staff moving into your properties, and that helps both sides.
Yeah.
I thought that was a brilliant idea. You spoke about how it has transformed you as an organization, but how has it transformed the traveler? Did you see anything different, anything more reinforced about the hostel culture itself, about why people travel?
I think the traveler sort of got so cooped. Average human being, I'm saying. I think it changed everybody. Everybody got cooped in so badly into their home spaces and they were restricted that even the non-traveler, I think, has become a traveler after the pandemic. People and families who were not traveling before, because they were cooped up inside, realized the importance of freedom and independence and hitting the road, right? So I think the revenge travel cycle that we saw right after the pandemic was a very, very real response to losing the ability to freely move out of your house. And I think that has impacted everybody, be it a traveler or a non-traveler. So the revenge travel bit of post the pandemic, and it became stronger with each wave. So the first wave, people were still, a little skeptical about stepping out. It took some time for it to become a huge wave of people traveling. The second wave, after 2 months, people came back with a massive vengeance that we've been cooped up again, and I don't know when I'll travel next. Let me just go right away. The third wave, we didn't even feel the drop too much. So, every time they were reclaiming their life a lot more strongly than before. So, and travel became a big expression of breaking that barrier that you've put me in my house with lots of restrictions on me.
We're recording this episode in August 22, and I think, there was a peak when people were doing this whole work from anywhere sort of a thing. And then, of course, certain corporate realities kicked in and people have moved back to the cities where their offices are. But what are you seeing in that? At your end, are you seeing any change in terms of people traveling to work out of there?
Yeah, we are, but I don't think it's a big trend, according to me, at least not in my... Earlier, before the pandemic, we were at an average length of stay of 1.5 nights. Today, we're at an average length of stay of about 2.5 nights. It's because I think the hybrid work model has allowed people to take a longer weekend.
Right.
So most of the organizations have moved to a hybrid work model, wherein a couple of days you're in office and the rest of the days you're working from home. So to that extent, the length of stay has increased. And they want to work from there. So as a result, the things that we need to provide that were not essential earlier, like which is a complete power backup, which we were not building from the beginning because the foreign backpacker didn't need that, or a very good Wi-Fi connectivity, became super important after the pandemic. Because people, even if they're traveling for 2 extra days, those 2 extra days are usually devoted to work. So they need uninterrupted Wi-Fi and electricity connection so that they don't have to cut a sorry figure in front of their bosses. Not that they're supposed to be online all the time, but there'll be meetings that they're expected to attend, right? So some of the spaces were converted into silent working areas in our hostels so that people could take their work hours from there. And, we became more focused about providing good internet and uninterrupted electricity connection at even the remote locations, or the remotest locations of goSTOPS as well. So I think that is there, but is work from home benefiting us? Yes, it is increasing the average length of stay, so it benefits us at an economic level. But is this a trend which has increased the number of people staying with us overall? I don't think so. That's not really happened. I don't think we still get that weekday slump, which would not have come had this become a really big trend in itself, that people are working for months together from another location. Then you will not get those weekday slumps. So it's still largely weekend driven, but longer weekends.
Right. You've seen this over the last 6-7 years now, and you've seen the highs and lows of this industry. As you come to office today, what are you most excited about, for the short-term future? Because I've come to believe that there is no another kind of future. Everything is the short-term future. For the next 2-3 years, what excites you most about this space?
I think because I've seen it over the last 8 years, and when hostels was not even a known concept, to now people talking about hostels because of all the players in the hostel industry, not just us, is a very exciting phase. And I think more and more people are getting to know about hostels. So I see more young people choosing hostels over traditional hotels. And I think they want to do it anyways. It's just that if I currently look at it, India would have about 12,000, 14,000 hostel beds only right now, which as compared to, a very large youth population, right? So
that's much lower than I would have guessed.
Yeah. So we're very short supplied as far as hostel beds are concerned. I would want to see this ecosystem strengthen, more hostels opening up, more people staying in hostels, all of those things. I'm very excited about that. I think also what has happened in Europe is over the years, because Europe has had hostels forever now. And so because of that, Southeast Asia has always had hostels, is see the segmentation of hostels emerge. So right now, hostels in India are not segmented. But in Europe, they are backpacker hostels, and then there are flashpacker hostels. So flashpackers hostels are the more premium hostels within the hostel category. So I think we will see the emergence of that segmentation in India as well. So hostel beds which are available at 700 rupees, 600 rupees a night, to another set of hostels where the beds will be available at 1200, 1500 rupees a night.
What would be different in the experience though of that?
I think typically flashpacker and backpacker hostels in Europe, and which will typically how it will emerge in India as well, is like how a star hotel differs, right? What's the difference between a 3-star hotel and a 5-star hotel? So they may have a bar, they may have a discotheque, they may have a couple of restaurants instead of just one. So as against a 3-star may not have a bar, it'll just have one restaurant or cafe.
Got it.
They may not have anything else, but a 5-star will have a pool or a jacuzzi or a spa. So that's the difference essentially that is going to emerge between the backpacker and the flashpacker hostel as well.
Awesome. Wonderful. Great. Pallavi, this has been fascinating. And we usually end the episode by asking our guest what he or she is watching, reading, or listening to. Anything that's keeping you distracted from what otherwise you seem to be enjoying so much?
Yeah, so I'm not much of a reader, but yes, I tend to keep something with me. So I'm reading this book called Murder at a Mushaira. It's essentially set in Delhi around 1857. So, and Mirza Ghalib, there happens to be a murder at one of the Mushairas, and Mirza Ghalib is the detective. So it's a very fun read. So that's what I'm reading. What am I watching? Nothing in particular. I think with OTT, you just sort of watch everything that is there.
Fleeting, isn't it?
Yeah, I just started watching. There's something called Loot, which is there on Apple TV, I think, and I keep forgetting which is what. So yeah, so I'm watching that. But yeah, I'm not a big content buff. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. And what am I listening to? I love ghazals and thumris, so that's what I'm listening to, and I am always listening to those only.
Are you big on podcasts?
I'm not, but podcasts are really growing, and it's a great medium, and wasn't there till a few years back, and now it's great. It's very nice to see so many podcasts and so many interesting topics being discussed.
Yeah, it is. In any case, Pallavi, thank you so much. It was lovely talking to you about hostel culture and what goSTOPS is doing. Good luck with all the new experiments you're trying out.
Thank you. Thanks, Karthik. Thank you for having me.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am _Karthik. That's Karthik with an H on Twitter. And Filter_Koffee. That's coffee with a K on Instagram.
Sneakers, there's so much more than just footwear. A cup of well-brewed coffee, that can taste like wine. Our phones can even tell the time, but a mechanical watch, that on your wrist, feels different. These subcultures, some very niche and some not so niche, are fantastic hobbies, and I'm obsessed with a lot of them. They're approachable, they're a lot of fun, and they're very, very therapeutic. My name is Anish, I'm the co-founder at Swami, a homegrown beverage brand, and I have many such niche interests, which I will explore with you on this podcast, aptly named Anish Thing. Anish Thing, every Tuesday on the IVM Podcast Network and all other major podcast platforms.
Namaste, this is Cyrus Brocha. I am part of the government cancel culture program to remove rubbish off all the different streams available. So what we have is all the collected rubbish we put together on our show. It's called Cyrus Says. It's on IVM Podcast. You have to watch it and listen to it. It's on our app. It's on our website. It's on the YouTube channel. It's on Facebook. There are many different ways. Don't bother me and ask me how. You have to find out. We talk to different personalities. Many of them are known. Some are just people we meet downstairs and invite them up for chai. But the point is, it's fun and it's very therapeutic. So please join in and listen to Cyrus Says.